What is up, everybody? Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And one of the other hats I wear is monthly I host online conversations for fathers that are sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. And I am jacked up. I'm fired up. I'm excited. Not only is it a beautiful Sunday afternoon out here in Toronto, but we have some beautiful people on. And before I introduce them, I like to take advantage of challenging situations. And yes, since probably mid-March, we've been living through some challenging times, personally, professionally, spiritually, mentally. But that's when I like to rise like a phoenix. And over the last little while, I've been thinking and saying, you know what? I want to launch at least once a month a conversation with Black Canadian leaders. And we just talk about whatever is going on or whatever they're passionate about for the benefit of not only Black Canadians, not only Canadians, but people all around the world. So this is what we've got going on today. This is the first edition of a new conversation series I'm calling Black Canada Talking. And what it's about, we're just going to have people on, Black Canadian thought leaders, chopping up about stories. Some of them may be local, provincial, national, international, and they're going to give their takes and POVs on whatever's going on in their heart and what they want to chat about and what they feel people should know about. And no better three people to have on the first episode of Black Canada Talking than Elle Jones, Warren Clarke, and Cesar Ndema-Moussa. Now, they have been on some of my recent conversations, and after the last one, I said, would you like to come on like once a month so we can just chop it up? And they said, absolutely. So they are here. I'm fired up. How is everyone doing today?
Great. Good.
Good. Everyone's good. Guys, you're so quiet. Come on now. All right. So what has been going on since we've been together digitally? I know Warren and Cesar dominate the airwaves in Ottawa. Like I was saying beforehand, every time you turn on a television station in Ottawa, they're on TV. So what's been going on in Elle's? I always like to do ladies first. Elle, what's been going on in your world?
Well, we've been making a new world. So we've had about 2 or 3 events every week where we've been building towards defunding, abolition, doing community assemblies. So on Friday, we had a really wonderful event where we held a march, but then we actually occupied the intersection for like 10 hours and we held the assembly. So doing teaching. So, talking to people about housing when they go in groups and what vision do they have for housing for the city? What vision do people have for mental health, for education? So we were doing that outside in groups to do a community assembly. So we've really been focusing now on when we're past the initial mobilizing stage, like these protests, into in this moment, how do we get education to the people so the people can liberate themselves? So a lot of work reaching out to Indigenous communities, the Muslim community, workers. So we've been really busy, but it's been great at the same time because a lot of young people are coming into this movement. A lot of people are first-time organizers and just building that core group. So I'm tired, but it's actually, it depends on the day. Some days you're frustrated and some days you're like, this is great. We're moving forward. But all the sort of necessary work of organizing. So that's really what we've been doing now for about a month in the city.
Excellent. Warren, are you getting any rest?
Yesterday I did, which was odd. I'll appreciate you. Thanks for, championing out Nova Scotia. Yeah, Nova Scotia, right? Appreciate you doing what you do. The work is not done. For me particularly, it's there's been sleepless nights, but I'm finding the courage and the energy to get up and continue to do it again, regardless of the amount of work in front of me. So I really appreciate and humble for the opportunity to lend my voice the way I'm doing it, and I continue to do so in the future. So that's all. So I'll stop there so I don't dominate.
No problem, Cesar.
Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Vibe. Hello, Elle. Hello, Warren. And hello, brothers and sisters. Donc, pour dire ça de manière simple, l'initiative de Dr. Vibe, c'est à la fin de chaque mois de nous réunir pour adresser des sujets par rapport à la communauté noire au Canada, mais également à travers le monde. So, Dr. Vibe, thank you so much for your efforts. And yes, Warren and I have been busy, but as I see Elle as well, and of course, my support to everyone. It's important we keep having these conversations because this is beyond just a matter of George Floyd and police brutality, but truly addressing all of systemic racism. And there are so many issues. We need more people to be involved. We need each and everyone, young, old, blacks, and even non-blacks, to dare to be involved, to come learn, to ask for help, and to always, as I say, to keep strategizing and coming together so that when we raise the fist, we're raising the fist, but we are working effectively against white supremacy and any other form of supremacy and oppression. And salutations to all the friends who are joining us in the live comments. Salut à tout le monde dans les commentaires qui nous rejoignent et nous encouragent.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd like to shout out everyone who's watching this live or on the replay. It's appreciated and not taken for granted. And just to tell everyone, we're aiming to do this with this group at least the last Sunday of each month at 5 p.m. Follow either any of us, and we'll keep you up to date on what's happening when it comes to Black Canada Talking with these wonderful individuals. I'd like to say salute to everyone's watching. A special hail out to Sarah. I love what Sarah said. A great way to spend Sunday evening. Thank you, Sarah. I'm all over that. That sounds like you want to get on the panel. So I know if you want to come on, Sarah, you know my contact information. I'd love to have you on. All right. And Patrick, thank you so much. Let's join the effort and push forward. All right. Probably the big story, one of the big stories going on in Black Canada right now is Defonte Miller. And I'm just going to read a little bit, but all the guests are going to get right into it. An off-duty Toronto officer's razor-thin claim to self-defense evaporated when he struck a badly injured and retreating black teen in the head with a metal pipe. The Ontario judge said Friday in convicting him of assault. Constable Michael Thoreau was cleared, however, of a more serious charge of aggravated assault in the 2016 beating that left Defonte Miller, then 19, with a ruptured eye and other serious injuries. However, the self-defense argument vanished when the off-duty officer armed himself with a roughly meter-long metal pipe and attacked Miller. Now, the gentleman, Mr. Thoreau, has a brother. His brother got off scot-free. This has incensed many Canadians on this, and I know that I thought first conversation that we have on Black Canada Talking, let's have your comments. Who wants to start about not only the case? And actually, I'll say one other thing. One of the ladies I have on a regular basis here is based in California, and she was watching this case attentively. Her name is Jill Jones, and just a little interesting information. She actually was part of the Prince entourage for 10 years. So she wanted to ask all of you three coming today, what are your guys' thoughts on this? So who wants to start?
I'm on mute. I'll start if you don't mind. Here's another situation where we're seeing anti-black racism, which is infused in our white settler nation state, also infused in our criminal justice system. Disappoint once again. We've been here before, and the unfortunate thing about this one is that there was an opportunity for the judge at least, to acknowledge anti-black racism more so than he did, or the judge did. In the judge's proceedings, he does mention that, in the current, climate of anti-black racism in contemporary moments it's disheartening. I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. But then still hands down this reasonable doubt judgment, which now is only an assault charge on Mr. Miller. We look at these moments and you say to yourself, like, well, does his body even matter? Does he even matter? And then that's an extension of our Black community members in general, regardless of your sexuality, your gender. This could have happened to anybody. But we need to recognize that this is, one thing I read in the article, but we need to recognize that, we've been having these conversations. We've been seeing these moments for some time now. And one thing that keeps staring its head or keeps coming up is it's a long way to go. It's a long way to go in terms of seeking or gaining real justice. And, in my view, this road has been, we're continuing to travel on this road for some time now. And it seems that, the white settler is not letting its knee off our neck, using that, respectfully, but to acknowledge the seriousness of what's happening here. on our bodies, literally. We can also extend this to what's been happening in the United States with black men, particularly. That's troubling gender for a moment. We're seeing moments of black men being hung off trees and lynched, and then considering that as suicide, right? So it's like, yeah, we're protesting, we're fighting, we're getting on news, and we're talking about these things. But it seems to me at this moment that they're hearing us, but not listening to us, and that's a huge difference. We need to recognize hearing is not going to do anything at this point. And it's unfortunate that we're seeing Mr. Miller, get partial justice of one of the police officers who were charged, or one of the brothers who were charged, and nothing to be done. So what message does that send? That sends to, other, particularly, on Toronto, I think it's Toronto police officers, that this is okay and you can get away with this, potentially. Also sends a message that, to our, young black men, that, this can happen to you as it's happened in the past, and it can happen again, and there'd be no repercussions on the police services that we need to see. There's so many things that can be said in regards to the impact of black men, particularly, and not negating black women, but, black men, we're seeing moments of that disregard for our lives, that disregard for, our feelings, disregard for our humanness, and every angle, every corner we go. So, black masculinity is definitely under attack. It's definitely not perceived as a racial and gender category in our white settler nation state that has any relevance to being human. And this is a narrative that's been continuing to play for years and years.
Elle?
Yes, thank you, Warren. So yes, hi everybody. So first of all, I think when people ask, why y'all burning down police stations, this is why we're burning down police stations. And I'm not saying either way whether I would burn one down. I'm just saying that, people who are like, wait upon justice. Martin Luther King told us that, and we're seeing it demonstrated. This is why Black people cannot wait upon justice. When we've been having this conversation about policing, a lot of us have been talking about we need to push it beyond just street policing and also talk about prisons, talk about CBSA, like immigration. And this is a really good example of the court system fails Black people as well. And if we forgot about that, this case shows us this, that the criminalization of Black people isn't just in a police stop or a check. It's also through all of these levels. And let's not forget that Defonte was initially charged. So he was the one facing charges before these officers were charged. And that happens frequently. We have a similar case with a woman, Santina Rayo here, who was beat down at a Walmart in front of her toddlers, like her 3-year-old and her 15-month-old. And she's charged with assaulting the officer, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace. And the officers who beat her and knelt on her neck as well, like crushed her windpipe, gave her a concussion, and broke her wrist in front of her children, they are not charged. So this is very, very, very common. And in Defonte's case, we're supposed to, I guess, be happy that at least the officers got charged. At least they dropped the charges on him, and at least one of them, well, officer and his brother, at least the cop got convicted of assault. But when we think about, for example, mandatory minimums that have been put in almost specifically to prosecute young Black men, particularly over gun laws, and then you can beat a Black man with a pipe, like a young Black man, chase him down, beat him with a pipe, and that's not aggravated. It just shows you again that whatever this justice system is, it's not for us, and it doesn't hold cops accountable. So what we should be taking out of this is that we need to be getting in these streets, that our times in the street is not just performative. It's actually us saying that this system is never going to give us justice. And we cannot continue to wait upon incremental change. And we cannot continue to wait upon white people to suddenly decide to see us as human. And as Warren said, this is very much about the bodies of Black men, how Black men have been historically criminalized, how Black men are always seen as dangerous or a threat. And this whole system is here to discipline and control our bodies. And reform will not change that. Body cameras will not change that. And that's exactly why we're calling to end this system. The other thing I do want to say as well is there's a lot of outrage, obviously, about the assault charge and it like being assault and not aggravated. But let's also talk about this obstruction charge, which I don't know if anyone with like any experience of the world ever thought would go through. But that charge is about the fact that all the cops lied and they all covered up. But it's an interesting question because they say that they like didn't know that these guys were cops, or that the guy was a cop, when the other cops show up. And I don't think anyone believes that. So the question is, were they lying to the cops? Did the cops believe them? Like, that's a really interesting piece of the obstruction charge. Like, did you actually fool these other cops? Like, does anybody believe those cops are fooled and didn't know what was up the whole time? Didn't you all know what was up, and weren't you all covering up? But yeah, we aren't talking as much about like that charge as well. That this wasn't just about an assault; it was about a mass cover up. Cops showing up at the house the next day to give them information. The dad that's like really high up in the TPS and is running a cover up. So it's not just that this cop and his brother should have been charged. Like all of the officers should have been charged. And that of course goes back to this question of some good cops, some bad apples, right? And this is again the proof of this statement that we keep making, that if this is just a few bad apples, why is everybody else covering for them? If this is just a few bad apples, shouldn't people have immediately come to the scene and be like, you don't get to beat people in the face with a pipe so they lose their eye, like you're gross. But that didn't happen. People supported them, stood up for them. And let's not forget that taxpayers paid for that lawyer. Like your money paid for those people to get off. So like, let's remember that when we talk about police budgeting and defunding and abolishing the police, we just paid for all of that for this person, one of them to get off completely and one of them to get like a minor charge will be like a misdemeanor. And if we're lucky, maybe he'll be dismissed from the police force, but I wouldn't even look to that. And let's also talk about the fact that the Ottawa police in the past have worn wristbands supporting cops that kill Black people. So, this is the same Ottawa. I mean, sorry, that was in Ottawa, but you know, these are the same police forces that fully 100% support cops who kill people. One of the chants we had at our rally on Friday was every single cop's a killer, justice for Defonte Miller, because I don't even think that's hyperbole. You know, if they're not doing it, they're largely supporting it. The police unions support it. And in the end, we pay for it. So, I get so angry about this case, to be honest. I'm normally, pretty composed when I'm on the news. And then I was on CTV and I actually cried with anger, which is like normally as a Black woman, I try not to, you know, be emotional in public, but just coming at this moment for all the work we've done, you know, for all the discussion we've had, and we're a month in. And of course, it's not surprising that nothing's changed, but it just brings it home, you know, how hard we have to struggle for every inch of justice and how much is taken from us at every moment.
Cesar L., thank you so much. Cesar?
Thank you. So first and foremost, I want to voice my support to Defonte Miller's family, to him himself, but also to his family and our Black community all over the world victim of police brutality. As Elle and Warren actually spoke already, I mean, I agree with everything they said. However, it's important for us to understand that what happened to Defonte Miller, and I say this as yesterday, I was introduced to a movie, Catherine Bigelow's Detroit on Netflix, in which, again, we literally see a police system that, contrary to what many people think, the system is not broken. The system is working. But the system was never created for fairness nor justice towards Black people. Remember, 1776 in America, when they said, just as in France in 1789, when they talked about, you know, freedom and equality under the law, it did include Black bodies. So let's be honest about that. Just as the United Nations, when it was created, African nations were still under colonization. So we have to be honest about the very nature of what we're talking about in terms of systemic issues, which go beyond Defonte Miller, just as George Floyd or Abdirahman Abdi and Regis Korchinski-Paquet or Freddy Villanueva in Montreal. So many names we can give, and of course around the world. Now, what I would, however, like to add is simply the fact as just as Defonte Miller, a lawyer, said, it's not about a few bad apples. There is this constant lie from police forces about a few bad apples, a few bad elements. And of course, too many in the communities take on the argument of training. So let me put it this way. This is where I really need for us to, when I talk about strategizing and thinking in terms of leadership and accountability at another level, let's be honest. If the issue regarding these police forces, as in the case of Defonte Miller, just as George Floyd and so many other names that we can go through, if it was really a matter of a few bad apples and a matter of training, where are all these Black cops treating such white innocent citizens, notably white women? But at the same time, where are all these white female cops treating so Black innocent men, women, and youth? There seems to be a matter of culture, and that clearly says seems, but really there is a problem of culture within these police forces, within these who are basically on like steroid under the badge and the gun in terms of terrorizing our communities, terrorizing those blacks and indigenous as well, LGBTQ, but especially blacks and indigenous in Canada, from Canada to Brazil, in the Americas, there is this constant terrorizing of minority populations, black and indigenous, that is making it that, again, when it goes to the justice court, as Elle said, we are supposed to be happy that, oh, at least there was some level of conviction, which is actually an insult. Because let's be very honest about this. If it was the other way around, that it was a black cop and his brother who had beat and mistreated a white youth to the point that the white youth would have lost his eye, I am telling you, the notion of aggravated assault would have been really be the condemnation they would have suffered. And we have to address the fact of, are police unions there really to support white police officers at any cost? Or are they there in terms of unions as other unions in other professional bodies in terms of solidarity? Just as we're talking of defunding the police, there's more and more a growing conversation in terms of the union circle about looking at police unions as not being part of the solidarity of workers for a more fair and equal world. Let's be honest, the notion of unions in terms of representative of the workers in in contrast to those who have power grew from a socialist / communist mindset. But truthfully, we see that police unions are just there to uphold the dominant order / statu quo in terms of white supremacy. So unfortunately, I'm not surprised at what happened regarding the Defonte Miller, just as when I was watching the movie Detroit regarding the Algiers motel brutality and murder of blacks in 1967. I am never surprised in terms of these issues because it is the exceptions of when a white cop is found guilty that only prove to confirm further the norm that they almost never, I should not say never, they almost never get found guilty, no matter the amount of proofs, no matter even the video recording. And this is why we must keep holding them accountable, being on the street. We must never lower our guard, and we must still be present. And as such, one of the things you will notice, allow me to go on that tangent, you will see more and more of the hypocrisy of those who will say all lives matter, but somehow, some way, when black bodies are being victimized, they are never there to be seen. You will see the hypocrisy of those who say not all cops are bad, but somehow you never see the good cops when the bad ones are hurting and killing our people. So these type of conditions must be addressed because ultimately it's beyond Defonte Miller, just as it's beyond George Floyd. It's about each and every one of us, brothers and sisters in each and every family and circle of friends. Very briefly, in French, c'est tout simplement que le cas de Defonte Miller ne me surprend en rien. Pourquoi? C'est parce que le système n'est pas cassé, le système n'est tout simplement pas fait pour fonctionner, pour nous représenter. Et en ce sens, on doit continuer à se mobiliser par rapport à ce genre d'enjeu, car du Canada au Brésil, les corps noirs comme autochtones, hommes, femmes et enfants sont toujours victimisés par un système qui défend une culture d'hommes blancs, nous martyrisant au point que on reste terrorisé et donc on ne doit jamais baisser notre vigilance.
Thank you very much, all three of you. I guess I have two other quick takes that I'd love to give your feedback on. So, gentleman from San Francisco who's on the Dr. Vibe show regularly, LaRon Barton. And a while back, he said to me, Dr. Vibe, there's no such thing as a good cop. And I said, what are you talking about, LaRon? He says, well, if every cop was good, they would be honest and tell about the bad things bad cops are doing. That's one point I'd like to get your take on. The second thing is it time to look at and see if Black communities should police our own? Who wants to jump into both those comments?
I guess I'll start.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we always need to separate personal from politics. I mean, we're not talking about whether people are good people. Like, do they love their kids? You know, are they nice to their mom? That's not the question and issue. We're talking about when you are empowered to wield the force of the state against its citizens, how do you behave and what do you do, right? So I'm not interested in if some cop coaches basketball and is nice to his kids. Like, I'm not disputing that. I've never disputed that. There's very few people I personally dislike, but people who are in power are held to particular standards of accountability, and the police are clearly not meeting those standards. So I'll give you an example. In Nova Scotia, we had an apology from the police for racial profiling, promptly followed by them like brutalizing 3 separate Black people. They started with an elderly man, then they went to Santina Rayo and a mother in front of her kids, and then a child, a 15-year-old boy. So, they were just really, getting more and more disgusting. And finally, the police chief had to suspend the cops, or like with pay or whatever they do, administrative leave, like move them around to a desk. It wasn't even like they got kicked off work because they beat up a 15-year-old child. And that was like a bit much. And the police union, wrote him an email and then leaked it to the media being like, you are making sure that we can't do our job. So they made it really clear that they consider it their job to be able to beat up Black people freely. When you're like, maybe you shouldn't beat up kids, they're like, let us do our job. So I think that tells us everything. If the police were actually good people and there were all these good cops and just a few bad cops, then when these incidents happened, 99% of the cops would be like, that person needs to go. That person doesn't represent us. And you can think of in your own profession. I teach. If I found out that another, member of faculty was, beating up kids in the classroom or like punching students in the face or sexually assaulting students or something, I would be like, that's not me. Like, get rid of that person. I wouldn't be defending them. I wouldn't be talking about like teacher lives matter or prof lives matter or whatever, right? So the fact that people wear wristbands for their fellow killer cops, the fact that when they are occasionally held accountable in the small amount of times they release statements supporting them, the fact that police unions are like the biggest obstacle to police reform, the fact that, for example, the Ontario Association of Police Chiefs, all of those chiefs vehemently resisted every effort to get rid of racial profiling. The fact that after you do so-called get rid of racial profiling, which is never got rid of, just reconstituted, but now we're being told carding is over and all of this. The fact that then they release articles to the papers, for example, talking about how now that they can't card, Black crime has gone up. That shows you what policing is about. So we have so much evidence from police themselves. This isn't something we have to make up in our own minds. We can look at secret cop Facebook groups and see them cheering on the killing of Colton Bushy. We can look at how police unions act. So, there's just so much that shows that police, it doesn't matter how they are personally. It doesn't matter whether they personally would do this. They don't speak out about it, and they support it, and they allow their unions to support it. So, if you walk like a duck and quack like a duck, as they say, you're a duck. So we can say that about bad cops. The second piece around what do we need to do? Yes, this is the question. And a lot of people find this, like the fantasy part of the conversation. Like, you guys are saying defund the police and abolish the police, but like, what can you do? This tells us something, because we grow up in a society with all these narratives about policing and justice in prisons. My nephew had like an alphabet book, when he was a kid, like, learning to read. And it was J is for justice with a picture of the RCMP. And my sister like pulled that page out, and his name's Jericho. So she put a picture of him and said, J is for Jericho. So before he knows anything, you're being taught that cops bring us justice. So then when we watch all these cop shows. Those cop shows are completely unrealistic. People have done the data on the show Cops and shown that they show way more Black people than white people, way more people that are actually committing crimes than actually do. So everyone's always guilty on cops, way more chases. So, we always see the cops like running down the so-called bad guys. So most people never get beyond this idea that the cops catch bad guys. So if we get rid of the cops, will we just be full of bad guys? In fact, what the cops do is mostly like noise complaints and like property complaints and like bylaws. They don't deal with a lot of felonies. So it's actually not necessary. Like, most of what cops do, we don't even need. Like, do you really need a cop to stop you and tell you that your taillight's out? Like, can't you start your neighbor tell you that? Like, so we really need to start rethinking, first of all, how we think about punishment and justice, and unpacking these myths that are really powerful, that have fed to us from childhood. So that when we talk about abolishing police, people are like, but then it would be the same world we have now, but just with chaos. And it's like, actually, we're talking about building a different world. So what would it look like if your neighbors were trained in crisis intervention, because that was part of our school system, and that we learned how to deal with mental health struggles, so that we didn't have to call the police because there were people trained in that? I'm not talking about social workers. I'm talking about people in our own community. In Andrew Loku's case, if we remember that case, he was headed to his neighbor's apartment when the police shot him. And his neighbor was like, he would come to me and I could calm him down. I could de-escalate. So we know that people can actually do this work without police. And we know that police don't actually deal with harm. So people will say, what about rapists? Well, what about rapists now? 1% of sexual assaults end up in conviction. Only 6% of sexual assaults even go to trial. So people are raping now when we have police. Your abuser is out here now when we have police. Your friend circle is not holding your rapist accountable now. So policing doesn't change that. What is going to change that is we take sexual violence seriously. We address patriarchy. We raise boys differently. We address the violence that young boys go through in their lives that often creates some of these issues. We talk about trauma and we heal as communities and we put our resources into that. So that's what we need to be doing, is not just saying this idea that somehow people just need force and we need to be forced to do things. We saw this in COVID. Like, there's this disease and we can't educate people about why we need to self-isolate. So we need to ticket people and punish them. And that mindset needs to change. And as Black people, we know that we actually do have the capacities in our communities to do this work. It's difficult work. I'm not saying it happens today, but we also have evidence. For example, in the corrections report on case study in diversity in corrections, Black people actually do better in community than any other group of people. We have the least recidivism when we're in community because we actually have the structures to heal and to deal with it. When we're in prison, we have the highest rates of discipline because it's subjective. And of course, when they see Black people get in trouble the most. And then when we're home, we do the best. So that shows us that punishment does not do the things we want it to do. It doesn't keep us safe. It doesn't stop crime. It won't stop someone from, raping you or breaking into your house or whatever it is that you fear. And all it does is actually create more crime, create more poverty, take resources from where they're needed and put them into punishment. We should not be spending $1 billion, or in my city, $118 million, $70+ million on corrections, $271 a day to keep somebody in jail. None of that is keeping you safe or keeping me safe. So that's what the policing conversation has to be about, not just budget lines, but how can we relate to each other differently? And how can we return to some of our philosophies on how to relate to each other and hold each other accountable and deal with harm and not think that a gun and a vest will ever deal with it.
Thank you, El. Warren.
Yeah, thank you. That was well said. Here's the thing. When we talk about police, we should recognize that the police are a gang. That's what they are, and let me explain what I mean. First off, we have police officers before they're cops who are desperately trying to be a cop, doing everything they can, doing all the testing, doing all the volunteer work, doing all the CPR training just to be a police officer. And once they get in, it's a new world for them. Once you're in that world, I've never done the training myself, but I've heard that there's certain rituals that you do that incorporates that person to be a police officer. The salute, the wearing a uniform. You're part of that culture, that police culture, which then insinuates it to be some of a group of people move at one beat, which then could be also a gang. Could be relate to being a gang like. So when we talk about telling or informing other police officers, that's slim to the next not going to happen, because you work so hard to be a cop, and then you're going to snitch on your fellow colleague who is also a cop. Then that's going to blackball you. That's going to, we've seen it in different movies, like one movie that comes to mind is RoboCop. I don't know, maybe because I watched it recently on Netflix, I think it was. But needless to say, or when you talk about telling on cops or cops telling on other cops, that's not going to happen, because they've taken that oath. They see them as their brothers in blue, as we've heard many times. And snitching is not part of the culture. Who they want people to snitch is people outside the gang culture or the police group. That's who they're more interested in anybody snitching, but not amongst themselves. And once we understand what that culture is, then we can understand that snitching is not going to happen. When we talk about should we police or should we I guess I don't want to use the word police, but manage our own communities, our Black communities. The first thing I'd like to say is Blackness is complex, folks. Not everybody perceives Blackness the same. Not every community, aligns itself with the same ideology of Blackness. We have to start from there. Fanon wrote about this in Towards African Revolution. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He mentions that the Black Caribbean and the Black African, they don't see eye to eye. because the Black Caribbean is more closer to whiteness in comparison to the Black African. That's just an example, troubling the work of Fanon, where he himself has identified that, the cohesion that we need to have in our quote unquote Black community is troubled by the thoughts or the thinking of how we perceive each other in our Black community. For example, another example, I'm Bajan. My parents are from Barbados. Speaking to some of my Jamaican friends, it's all fun and games at times, but there's some seriousness behind that in terms of cooking. What island cooks better than the other? For example, for a lot of Bajans out there, whoever's watching, we have one of our staple dishes is kuku. And when people hear what kuku is or they see it, they're like, that's weird, that's different, but that's our staple. That's one of our main dishes. In comparison to other islands, they have their own. And that right there is a difference in cultures in between Black folks that we have to acknowledge. So policing, again, I don't want to use that word, but managing, our Black community, it will take a lot of work, because of notion of how Blackness is perceived. One thing that Elle mentioned and I really appreciate is, raising our children. One of the things that, we have to be cautious about, and I've said this in many ways, and I say this only with respect, is we need to do a better job in, managing ourselves and managing our relationships within our communities. We need to do a better job in doing that. It's, one of the things we do, and this is no secret, but we put a lot of strain in our community to manage our community. There are community workers, particularly youth workers, who are working more than the 7-8 hour jobs just to help manage some of the Black youth in our community. Literally. If it's not in person, they're doing it on, social media, through text messaging, through WhatsApp, just to ensure that they're closely, in view or closely connected with these young people. So, we have to think about, how these young Black, people who are taking on roles as youth advocates or social workers, or youth employment training program coordinators, who are actually doing that work. That's, a lot of them are facing mental exhaustion. And primarily where I see this is the work that I do with the research I conduct on youth unemployment in Ontario and Quebec, right? So, we have to be very, very mindful about how we manage our community. It's easier said than done. And the only way it starts is, and I've heard this a few times this week, it starts in the home, but you can't start in the home if the home is broken. And it's not to say that all Black community homes are broken. It's to say that, there's some work that needs to be done to ensure that we can fix these unfortunate situations in our Black communities, right? We can talk about the single mothers out there or single fathers out there, because it does go both ways, which sometimes not acknowledged, right? Like, it's a lot of strain on our Black communities to do this work. And one thing we don't realize is that, we're told from when we're young, we got to work harder than the white man or the white woman to be seen, but we got to do that within our communities too. We're working extra hard to ensure that we're taking the precautions necessary to either educate, to support, or just show up for many of our Black community members, right? One thing that Dr. Vibe, you asked is how are we doing after the particularly with Cesar, or all three of us, sorry, Elle, Cesar, and myself, with all the media attention we've been getting. I needed a break yesterday, for example. I would love to be on TV 24 hours to lend my voice, not to show off for fame, but to lend my voice to help the community. But being on TV or being on radio or being on a panel every day, that's the mental strain on me, right? And we have to acknowledge that that's happening with a lot of Black community leaders, right? We can't put that strain all on them. We need to all step up collectively. We need to all learn collectively. We need to understand social oppression collectively so we can collectively do a better job in our communities. So, when it comes to, should we, again, I don't want to use that word, managing our communities, it's not just, yes, we can go do it. We have to strategize. We have to understand how to do it. And we have to understand what child rearing is. We have to understand what, the social oppression of, that we've faced together collectively. regardless if you're a man, woman, child, doesn't matter your social location. We need to understand these things before we just say employ, like, hey, let's just manage ourselves. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to leave that with you, and then I don't want to dominate. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren, for that. And thank you, because I'm not going to use the word policing anymore. I'm going to use manage. So thank you so much. I received that big time. Before I let Cesar share, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for their comments in the comments section. Also, to if BIA Media is there in the background, we're going to put a link up on the screen that if you have any comments on this conversation post, there's a little survey that you can fill out and also provide suggestions on how you'd like what we can do to make it better for you, because we're here for you. We work together to win together as a people. So just wanted to put that link up there. We'll put it up again near the end, and I may even put my email address up if it's only good email. No, I'm just joking. So Cesar, how you like to follow up after the great foundation that Elle and Warren have shared?
Congrats to my brother and sister, Elle and Warren. That was well said. The way I will add to it is regarding the first question in terms of the police. Listen, the notion of good cop has actually been deconstructed in philosophy. Whether we take the example of Michel Foucault regarding power and knowledge, or even when we look in terms of colonial / African Caribbean context of police and violence as a result of slavery and colonization, the truth of the matter is simply this. In the Western world, the police forces in relation to blackness, there are no, in principle, there are no good cops for the very simple reason that the likeliness of a cop, mainly white, but even black, to turn against the very institution that provides the salary and that provides the pension, but also provides a corpus of brethren in arms and in uniform, is extremely unlikely. This is why when we see cops standing against other cops, it's either because they're retired, or if they do it while being in service, they either get punished on administrative leave, or, and I dare to say it, they are helped to commit suicide. Let's be honest about this. So when we look at it philosophically, one of the things that simply happen is this. The very institution of police in the Western world towards minorities, so let's take the example of the Americas, from Canada to Brazil, you have an institution born from slave catchers. From that very moment, the fact of the institution being born from slavery in oppression to blacks, but as well in terms of the corpus of law, the body of laws, that when you are a cop, you agree to enforce and apply laws that even you as an individual, you may judge to be unjust. So this is beyond a matter of the nature of any job. This is also a matter of the fact that when you are a cop, you are the government representative in terms of the use of force up to the level of death. What ends up happening in terms of black bodies? Whether we look at before the 50s civil rights movement, or such as we look at, the 1960s riots, or we look at Rodney King in the 90s, we look at the 2010s, and right now, George Floyd, what ends up happening? The same cops in the same system, they tend to stay shut. So they will tell you there is just a few bad apples, as for example, they try to do not only here in Ontario, but also in Quebec. But what happened is that there's a denial of systemic racism. There is a constant narrative about a few bad apples, but somehow, somewhere, nobody dares to say anything. And the mysterious good cops are never to be seen when black people are being killed by other white cops. You have right now, it was actually this week in Paris, in France, you have women, the wives of police officers, who protested in support of cops. But where are they when black people are being killed? Where are they when black people are basically being victimized by their husbands, by their brothers, by their friends? Silence. So you have that problem that needs to, that needs to be addressed in terms of us realizing the good cop. It's not that cop who's at the basketball court, at the barbecue cookout, It's not the cop that, because maybe he knows how to dance or he knows how to twerk. That's not a good cop. The good cop is the one who intervenes and stops one of his fellow officers from killing a black or indigenous person. And too often that's rare to see. And regarding the next question, in terms of, some say policing or managing, well, of course, it's absolutely possible. Why wouldn't that be possible? When we look at, for example, if I take the example of, how do you call them? New York City guardian angels, but even without them, we look in the Jewish community, they have the body called the Shomrim. The Shomrim, who basically are proactive in terms of crime prevention within the Jewish community. Yes, there are abuses, such as, for example, regarding racism and regarding the concept of Mesira, which is an interpretation of the Torah, not to denounce a fellow Jew to non-Jewish authorities. Yes, we can address all of that. But of course, if the Jewish communities are able to do it, why not the black communities? Of course, the difference is that too often in the black communities, it's not just that we are divided. We're not really divided. We divide ourselves. We take for excuses of backgrounds in terms of immigrants versus, for example, descendants of slavery, Christian and Muslim, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, in terms of the system of power and even the discourse which constructs the language to address to us, we are seen first and foremost as blacks. And as such, by us being able to come together and organize ourselves and strategize, this is what Pan-Africanism is about. We are able to uplift our communities and as such to manage the issues of order and crime prevention within our communities without having to have white cops coming to commit violence. And when I say this, I know boys in the hood, there are black cops who are also very violent, but overwhelmingly we see that it's white male cops who are killing and beating innocent, unarmed black people. So, pour dire très court en français, c'est très simple. La notion de bon flic est une notion qui est philosophiquement prouvée comme étant fausse, puisque la nature de l'institution elle-même dans les Amériques, du Canada au Brésil, étant née de l'esclavage, mais en plus de cela, le fait qu'un policier agrée à renforcer, à appliquer des lois qui, même au niveau individuel, seraient injustes, rend le fait de bon policier nul, puisque un bon policier, ce n'est pas celui qui est sur le terrain de basket ou de foot ou bien au barbecue, mais ça serait celui qui intervient pour empêcher un de ses collègues de tuer une personne noire ou autochtone. Or, cela est tellement rare que les exemples sont trop peu. Et de surcroît, par rapport à la notion de pouvoir nous-mêmes nous réguler en tant que communauté noire, oui, je dis que c'est absolument possible. L'exemple des communautés juives, telles à New York, mais également à Londres, par l'institution du Shomrim, qui fait en sorte que, entre elles-mêmes, prévention du crime, mais également de manière proactive entre eux pour empêcher des personnes extérieures de venir maltraiter les leurs. Donc oui, il y a des abus tels de racisme envers la communauté noire et également de, comment on appelle, de non-dénonciation aux autorités non juives basées sur une interprétation de la Torah dit Messira, mais c'est totalement possible. Et pour ça, il faut qu'on se réunissent en tant que communauté noire et qu'on cesse de se diviser par le fait de immigrants natifs tels africains, antillais, chrétiens, musulmans, ce genre de choses, puisque au niveau de la construction du langage, donc le discours, de l'intellectualisme en soi, on est vu d'abord et avant tout comme étant noir et non pas au travers des différences que nous-mêmes, en tant que noirs, nous aimons nous créer, nous inventer.
Thank you very much. Now, I have a challenge here, a real challenging thing right now, because we are scheduled for 1 hour and we had another conversation topic, but that topic, to even try to start that and do it in 10 minutes, it ain't gonna happen. But I know that two of our panelists, or at least one of our panelists, has something that she wants to add on. So we're going to just ride it out to the end of the hour. But I know that either Elle or Warren, you have something you may want to address. So who would like to go first?
Elle, give him that word.
Well, I did want to address this comment, and I do think that this is part of some of the rhetoric that does go around our communities. So first of all, the comment said, why is a Black immigrant commenting on Black American life? And I want to acknowledge that these kind of tensions are very, very much central in our communities as we're working I'm in Nova Scotia. There's African Nova Scotians. There's people from different communities. And part of this time is we have to really find a way to bring those interests together, even though we're all different. But the first thing is, this is a conversation about policing in Canada. So policing is not somehow just a solely American issue. And the reason why Canadians are on the streets right now isn't because we're protesting something far away from us. We're protesting things happening in our own communities. So we're not commenting on Black American life. We're actually commenting on our own lives. But even if we were commenting on Black American life, given how dominant American culture is, including Black American culture, of course, Black people around the world are going to have comments on American culture, even though this particular conversation isn't even about that. Even if it were, you can't both, flood our media with constant, American content and then ask us why we're interested or have some kind of interest in discussing it. And then I do want to address this immigrant rhetoric. And I know again that we have a lot of issues around this, like who's Black in what way, who belongs to our community. And I do think we need to talk these out in hopefully helpful ways where we come together. But again, an immigrant who lives, when does one become valid enough to discuss issues in a country that one lives in or observes, right? So a Black immigrant does not have any less claim to talking about Black issues than anybody else. And I think we really need to avoid those issues in our communities of who's a real this and who's not a real that, especially at a moment where we're not going to get to any kind of political solution if we can't unify our community. So we hear this in Nova Scotia as well. There's African Nova Scotians. We can talk about the real class differences that exist from people that have experienced, white supremacy in Canada for over 400 years. But we also understand that we are a global people, and we have to also think globally. We don't just have an interest in Black people in Canada. We have an interest in Black people in America and in the Caribbean and across the continent, and wherever Black people are in the world, which is everywhere, because our liberation struggles are all bound up together. So, there's not one Black community that has more right or more claim to Black issues than other Black people. And I think we really I know where those things come from. I mean, I'm mixed race. So obviously I understand that sometimes people are also like, you're not totally Black, or you're not, what's the role of mixed race people? Or, what's the role of people raised in white communities? Or, these are deep questions, and they go to really, I think, traumatic and serious issues with Black people. But we also really need to talk about it when it's raised, because they become very troublesome issues in our organizing, I think. So those divisions between, who's a real this and who's a real that, I think we can have that discussion politically around where our politics are, and are our politics moving us forward and helping us, or are our politics holding us back? But those aren't based in the skin shade that we have, or the background that we have, or, where we're from. So I just wanted to address that, because I think we see these comments a lot, and I think it's actually important to discuss it. And if the person who made the comment wants to chat back, they also should feel that they can.
I want to add value. Al, thanks for giving that work. Appreciate that. I just want to add something real quick. Ignorance is not a bad thing. Willfully ignorance is. All right. And sometimes when you ask questions, you're asking more times, I'd say, you're asking to seek knowledge of something to fill that void of the unknown. Here's the thing. When we talk about, in this question, why is a Black immigrant right there? The first thing I'm acknowledging in my head is that that's a talk of white supremacy right there. That's it. That is an example right there of how we've learned to communicate to one another based on that white supremacist discourse, which is anti-Black, right? Elle said a good job, so I don't need to echo anything what she said, but I just want to, pinpoint for viewers out there is when we approach questions or we make comments, we have to always keep in mind that sometimes our comments and our questions can be oppressive based on how we understand this world, which is based on that white settler ideology. And that question and how it's posed is an attack on Black bodies, regardless if they're immigrant or not. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be very mindful of wording, and we have to be mindful of our ignorance, because if this question was to stare its head again, respectfully saying from the individual who posed it, and if they were to pose it again, and a question similar to this, it can also be deemed as willfully ignorant, which then can be, for me, problematic. Because if you're being willfully ignorant and not trying to change your understanding, your perception of the world, and you're trying to bring in this nasty attitude, not saying you person, but generally speaking, you bring this nasty white settler attitude, then I have no choice but to comment on that. So it's very important that we watch, what we are saying and how we're addressing each other or with one another, because it could be very easily we take on that, that clothing, which is that white settler understanding, and we just make up words, we make up these statements, and we just say these things, and not realize what we're saying is the words of the oppressor, the sentence of the oppressor. The whole structuring of our ideology is of the oppressor. And if you're not recognizing that, again, you're signing to be willfully ignorant. And that's, again, where it's going to be problematic. So I know I repeated that again, but I wanted to make sure very clear. Thanks.
Cesar, close out this week's conversation.
So I believe the comment was made when I was addressing the question, and why is a Black immigrant commenting on Black American life? Well, thank you, Al. Thank you, Warren. They said it pretty well. This is the language of white supremacy. And I'm going to add further to that. Well, let me see. Detroit police did not care that I'm born in Cameroon, grew up in France, and I came in 2008 to work for the Obama election. They only saw me as a Black man. Everywhere I've been around the world, just as Amadou Diallo, when he was shot by 41 bullets, NYPD police did not inquire if he was a Black American or a descendant of slavery. Just as when the U.S. Secretary of State or Foreign Department in China sent email to Black Americans in China when some of the Chinese started to accuse Black people of coronavirus and aggressing them, they didn't basically do a distinction in terms of the Chinese, whether you were American or you were born in Africa in the last 60 years. Just as slavery in terms of Brazil was way worse than in the USA, and this is something many Black Americans may not like to hear, but it's absolutely factual, way worse. Listen, this is part of the education we must do and the coming together I was talking about in terms of Pan-Africanism. We like to try to divide ourselves, and as such, we end up espousing the language of white supremacy in terms of divide and conquer. But guess what? On the four corners of the world, we are seen first and foremost as Blacks, and we are treated as such. We must not fall into this type of narrative with respect to ethnicity, where effectively some being descendant of slavery have particularities that those who are immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean do not have. But at the end of the day, we're talking here about police and police brutality. Do you really think a cop is going to inquire whether your grandparent was descendant of slavery or whether you came here from an airplane? No, they won't care. So this is part of the education that as Black people, we must do to ourselves. I know we're out of time. Dr. Vab, I just want to take a very quick moment to honor Pride Month, the Pride celebration, and notably remind people Black LGBTQ activism started with Black people being organized, getting involved, and as such, the Philadelphia flag is what really represents the involvement of Black people in the LGBTQ movement. And this is growing as well in Africa with the example of Gabon, but also when we see the Supreme Court of the United States forbidding discrimination against LGBTQ in the workplace, we have to honor that it's Black, queer, Black, trans who stood up first and foremost in terms of the activism of LGBTQ life. Respect to them.
Thank you very much on those closing comments. Everyone, I'm going to give each panelist or each friend, I'm going to give a panel, each friend 30 seconds to say if they've got anything coming up and where they can best be reached. So ladies first as always. Elle, what's coming up on your agenda and how could people contact you?
So on the first, I'm part of a migrant justice seminar, discussing some of the issues that we're actually kind of talking about now with borders and nations and particularly the state of migrant workers. And then on the second, I'm part of a panel with Indigenous people talking about policing. People can find me on Facebook, but I'm like at my friends limit, or you can email me at el.jones@msvu, like Mount St. Vincent University.ca if people have any questions.
Thank you so much. Warren Clarke.
So what am I? I'm not doing. Jeez, I know I'm writing a dissertation. That's what my professor is probably online watching this. I got to make sure I say that first. I'm finishing my dissertation this summer. That's exactly what I'm doing. But no, I'm also the founder of the Barbershop Talk Black Men and Misconception. We have another session scheduled for July 25th. That's just Saturday. So I will be sending that information to Dr. Vibe, and I'm sure he will send it to folks who are interested, or if there's networks. Also, co-founder of the Afro-Caribbean Mentorship Program here in Ottawa. She's been doing very well for the last 2 years. So I just want to acknowledge that we are working with Carlton more exclusively on a relationship solidarity, and look forward to establishing that project more robust within the institution, because it's a long time coming for that. No other media stuff for me. If you want to check out anything, you can visit my website, warrenclarke.ca, and all my wonderful things and projects are there. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. Cesar.
Very simply, in terms of where I can be reached, I am the president of Roots and Culture Canada, and with CEO Kesia Peters, we are always standing and advocating for the community, for communities here in Canada and worldwide. At the same time, I can be found, of course, on Facebook, Cesar Remy, I-R-I-M-Y, Emery, E-M-E-R-Y. And in terms of what I got coming, well, like every week, as director of equity, diversity, and inclusivity, training public servants on indigenous oppression and anti-Black racism, but as well training boards and having these conversations that matter regarding Black Lives Matter, and also the impact of systems of oppression from police, but as well governments, and also religion, and the impact in terms of minority bodies, and how to address and truly deconstruct whiteness, such as in terms of white supremacy, and try to advance towards a more equitable world for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you, all three of you, for an absolutely outstanding first edition of Black Canada Talking. Myself, what do I have? If you're watching this live on June 28th, tomorrow night, I am hosting a conversation about fatherhood and racism that is being co-sponsored by Dad Central, which is Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. On Tuesday, I have to give a talk to a major organization about anti-Black racism in the workplace. So that is going to be interesting. And we just, whatever else comes on these days, I just do. Best way to touch base with me is on my website, thedrvibeshow.com. I'd like to thank everyone for watching live or watching or listening on the replay. I'd like to thank BIA Media. Keep watching what's going on with each one of us. We are doing outstanding things. Also, BIA Media is going to put up a link. Would love to get your feedback on this conversation. So if you can, take the link down, copy the link. It's like a 2-minute survey. We want to get your feedback, and we also want to know, what do you want us to chat about? That's the key thing. We want to be community driven. Excellent. So this is the way I end off all my conversations. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher and wider. And also remember, as Robert F. Smith says, don't waste this crisis. God bless. Peace be well. Walk good. Bye, everybody.